She knew this morning would change everything. She just didn't know how much. The steam from Marlo Elizabeth Hayes' coffee mug created a thin veil between her and the spreadsheet that had consumed her last 3 hours. 7 a.m. sharp. Black coffee in her grandmother's vintage porcelain cup. The same ritual that had anchored her morning since she was 15. Her fingers moved across the keyboard with surgical precision, each number finding its designated cell in the color-coded masterpiece that was her quarterly analysis. Blue for revenue, green for profit, red for... She whispered to herself, then bit her lower lip, a nervous habit that surfaced whenever the numbers didn't align perfectly. The fluorescent lights of Meridian Corp's data analysis department hummed overhead, casting harsh shadows across her pale skin. Her black hair was pulled into its usual professional bun, not a strand out of place, though her striking blue eyes held a restlessness that no amount of organization could tame. The elevator chimed in the distance, but Marlo didn't look up. She had trained herself to tune out the corporate symphony, the clicking heels, the coffee machine's gurgle, the endless phone calls that meant nothing to her world of data and logic. Numbers didn't lie. Numbers didn't disappoint. Numbers didn't leave you standing alone in a hotel hallway at 3 a.m, wondering if what you felt was real. Don't think about that night, she commanded herself, pressing her lips together until they formed a thin line. 3 months ago. Ancient history. Morning. Sunshine. Elena Vasquez's voice cut through her concentration like warm honey. Her roommate appeared beside her desk, holding 2 breakfast burritos wrapped in foil. You left before the coffee finished brewing again. I had work to finish. Marlo's voice was soft but carried an edge that Elena had learned to recognize. Besides, I have my coffee. Elena's warm brown eyes studied her friend's face with the intuition of someone who had shared a cramped 2-bedroom apartment for 4 years. Marley, you've been working 16-hour days for 3 months. Even machines need maintenance. I'm fine, Eli. The nickname slipped out, softening Marlo's defensive tone. She accepted the burrito with a grateful nod. Grandmother's medical bills won't pay themselves. The mention of her grandmother made Elena's expression shift to concern, but before she could respond, the elevator doors opened with a sharp ding that seemed to echo through the entire floor. The usual morning chatter died instantly, replaced by an electric tension that made Marlo's skin prickle. She didn't need to look up to know who had arrived. The sudden stillness, the way conversations stuttered and died, the almost imperceptible shift in the office's energy, it all pointed to one person. Caspian Alexander Reed had entered the building, against every instinct screaming at her to keep her eyes on her screen. Marlo found herself looking toward the elevator. There he stood, 6 feet 3 inches of tailored navy suit and controlled power. His dark hair was perfectly styled, those premature silver threads at his temples catching the light like a crown. His brown eyes swept the floor with the casual authority of someone who owned not just the building, but the ground it stood on. For one terrifying moment, their eyes met across the sea of cubicles and half-walls. And in that instant, Marlo realized that some storms never truly pass. They just wait for the perfect moment to return. Some silences scream louder than words ever could. The moment stretched between them like a taut wire, ready to snap. Caspian's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly, and Marlo watched as his hand moved to adjust his silk tie, a gesture she remembered from that night 3 months ago when nervousness had made him human instead of untouchable. Hayes, his voice cut through the morning air, formal and cold as winter steel. Conference room. Now. Elena's hand found Marlo's shoulder, squeezing gently. Want me to come with you? She whispered, her maternal instincts kicking in despite being only a year older. No. Marlo's voice was barely audible, but her spine straightened with quiet determination. She saved her spreadsheet with deliberate calm, each click of the mouse a small act of defiance against the chaos brewing in her chest. I can handle this. Liar, her heart whispered, but her feet carried her toward the glass-walled conference room anyway. The walk across the office felt endless. 43 steps. She had counted them once during a particularly boring afternoon. Today, each step echoed in her mind like a countdown to execution. She could feel the eyes of her coworkers following her movement, their curiosity mixed with sympathy. Everyone knew Caspian Reed's reputation: ice-cold, brilliant, and absolutely ruthless when it came to business. What they didn't know was that she had seen him laugh, really laugh, with his head thrown back and joy lighting up those intense brown eyes. They didn't know about the scar on his left shoulder from a childhood accident, or how he took his coffee, 3 sugars, no cream, stirred counterclockwise exactly 5 times. The conference room door closed behind her with a soft click that sounded like a prison cell locking. Sit. Caspian didn't look at her as he spoke, his attention fixed on his phone screen. His fingers moved across the surface with the same precision she used on her spreadsheets, but there was tension in his shoulders that his expensive suit couldn't hide. Marlowe remained standing. If this is about the Morrison account analysis, I can have the revised numbers to you by. It's not about the Morrison account. His voice was quiet, dangerously so. Finally, he looked up, and the full force of his attention hit her like a physical blow. It's about loyalty, Hayes. About knowing where someone's priorities really lie. Her stomach dropped. He knows. Somehow, impossibly, he knew about her grandmother's medical bills, about the second job she worked weekends at the neighborhood grocery store, about the way she counted every penny and saved every receipt. I don't understand what you're implying, Mr. Reed. A muscle in his jaw twitched at the formal address. 3 months ago, her lips had whispered his name like a prayer in the darkness of his penthouse bedroom. Now, the distance between Caspian and Mr. Reed felt like an ocean neither of them knew how to cross. Don't you? He stood slowly, his full height making the spacious conference room feel suddenly cramped. Because I heard something interesting yesterday evening about your, personal commitments. The words hit her like ice water. Her phone call with her grandmother. He must have overheard somehow. But how could he possibly have misunderstood? I heard you whispering sweet words to someone, Caspian continued, his voice growing colder with each syllable, promising to take care of them, talking about how much you loved them. Oh God, he thought. He actually thought she was seeing someone else. And in that moment, Marlowe realized that sometimes the truth is more dangerous than any lie. The truth had never felt so much like a weapon she couldn't use. You're wrong. The words escaped Marlowe's lips before she could stop them, raw and desperate. Her hands trembled slightly as she gripped the back of the leather chair, knuckles white against the dark material. You don't understand what you heard. Caspian's laugh was sharp, bitter, nothing like the warm sound she remembered from that night when he'd told her about his childhood dog, a golden retriever named Whiskey, who used to steal his homework. Don't I? I love you so much, sweetheart. I'll take care of everything, I promise. Those were your exact words, Hayes. The mimicry of her voice, twisted with sarcasm, made her flinch. She had said those words, but not to a lover, to her 83-year-old grandmother, who had been crying about the latest medical bill, afraid she was becoming a burden. It's not what you think. Save it. He moved closer, and she caught the familiar scent of his cologne, cedar and bergamot, expensive and understated. It brought back memories of silk sheets and whispered confessions, of a night when the CEO mask had slipped completely. I offered you everything, Marlowe. Everything. And you chose to disappear like I meant nothing. The use of her first name, soft and wounded, nearly broke her resolve. But she couldn't tell him about her grandmother. Not when he was looking at her like she was something distasteful he'd found on his shoe. Her pride, inherited along with her grandmother's blue eyes and stubborn chin, wouldn't let her beg for understanding. I never asked for anything from you, she said quietly, her voice steady despite the earthquake happening in her chest. No, you just took what you wanted and vanished. His brown eyes held a mixture of hurt and fury that made her stomach clench. 3 months, Hayes. I spent 3 months wondering if you were dead in a ditch somewhere. I had people looking for you. He looked for me. The revelation hit her like a physical blow, stealing her breath. Elena had been right. Something had felt different these past months, like invisible eyes were watching. She'd attributed it to paranoia, to the guilt of leaving without a word. I didn't know, she whispered. Of course you didn't. You were too busy playing house with someone else. He stepped back, straightening his tie with sharp, angry movements. Well, congratulations. You've made your choice crystal clear. The injustice of it burned through her chest like acid. Here she was, working 16-hour days to pay for medications and treatments, eating ramen noodles for dinner so her grandmother could have proper meals, and he thought she was living some romantic fantasy with another man. Mr. Reed, from now on, Hayes, you report directly to me. His voice had shifted back to pure business, but there was a cruel edge beneath the professionalism that she'd never heard before. Every analysis, every report, every coffee break, I want to know exactly how you're spending company time. The conference room door opened with a soft whoosh, and Benjamin Carter stepped inside, his expression carefully neutral but his dark eyes alert. "Sorry to interrupt. The Morrison team is ready for the presentation. We're done here." Caspian didn't even look at Marlowe as he spoke. "Hayes, I want that quarterly report on my desk by end of day, and I want it perfect." As he brushed past her toward the door, his shoulder bumped hers, whether intentionally or not. She couldn't tell. The brief contact sent electricity through her entire body, a reminder of nights when that same touch had meant comfort instead of punishment. Benjamin lingered as Caspian left, his basketball player's frame filling the doorway. "You okay?" he asked quietly, genuine concern in his voice. Marlowe forced a smile, the same one she'd perfected at 15 when social workers asked if she was adjusting well to living with her grandmother. Just another day in paradise. But as she watched Caspian's retreating figure through the glass walls, she knew that some wars are fought in silence, and she was losing this one badly. Sometimes the body reveals secrets the mind isn't ready to accept. The numbers on Marlowe's screen blurred together like watercolors in the rain. She blinked hard, pressing her fingertips against her temples where a headache had been building since her confrontation with Caspian 6 hours ago. The Morrison report sat unfinished, cursor blinking mockingly at the end of an incomplete sentence. "Girl, you look like death warmed over." Elena appeared beside her desk carrying 2 steaming cups from the cafeteria downstairs. "When's the last time you ate something that wasn't wrapped in foil?" "I had the burrito you brought this morning." Marlowe accepted the coffee gratefully, inhaling the familiar comfort of cream and sugar, the opposite of Caspian's preference for black bitterness. "That was 12 hours ago." Elena perched on the edge of the desk, her scrubs from her hospital shift still carrying the faint scent of antiseptic. "Marley, I'm worried about you. You've been working yourself into the ground, and now Reed's got you under some kind of microscope. This isn't healthy." Through the glass partition, Marlowe could see Caspian's office. The lights were still on, his silhouette visible as he paced back and forth, phone pressed to his ear. Even angry and cruel, he was beautiful in that devastating way that had first caught her attention at the company Christmas party. She'd been serving drinks, a side job she'd picked up to help with her grandmother's physical therapy costs, when he'd looked at her like she was the only person in the room. "I can handle it," she murmured, but even as she spoke, a wave of dizziness washed over her. The coffee cup slipped from her fingers, hot liquid spilling across her keyboard and desk. "Shit!" Elena was immediately in motion, grabbing napkins from her purse. "My Marley, are you—" The world tilted sideways. Marlowe gripped the edge of her desk, but it wasn't enough. The fluorescent lights above seemed to pulse and strobe, and suddenly the floor was rushing up to meet her. "Marlowe!" Elena's voice sounded far away, echoing as if from the bottom of a well. When consciousness returned, she was lying on the small couch in the break room, Elena's warm hand on her forehead and worried brown eyes staring down at her. The harsh office lights had been dimmed, and someone had draped a jacket over her. Expensive wool that smelled like cedar and bergamot. Caspian's jacket. "Hey, take it easy." Elena's voice was gentle but firm, the same tone she used with her pediatric patients. "You fainted. Scared the hell out of everyone." Marlowe tried to sit up, but Elena's hand pressed her back down. "How long was I out?" "About 10 minutes. Long enough for half the office to gather around like you were some kind of medical mystery." Elena's expression shifted to something more serious. "Marley, when's the last time you had a physical? And don't lie to me. I'm a nurse. I can smell bullshit from 3 floors away. I'm fine. Just tired and—" "When was your last period?" The question hit like a slap. Marlowe's mind raced backward, trying to remember. With everything that had happened, Caspian's return to her life, the increased workload, caring for her grandmother, she hadn't been tracking the usual rhythms of her body. I don't." Her voice trailed off as the pieces began clicking into place. The exhaustion that no amount of sleep could cure, the way certain smells made her stomach turn, the emotional volatility that had her crying over grocery store commercials. "Oh, honey." Elena's voice was soft with understanding. "How long has it been since you and Mystery Man had your encounter?" 3 months, Marlowe whispered, the words feeling like lead in her mouth. "Almost exactly 3 months." The break room door opened with a sharp click, and Benjamin Carter stepped inside, his dark eyes immediately finding Marlowe on the couch. "How is she?" he asked Elena, but his gaze remained fixed on Marlowe's pale face. "She needs to see a doctor. Elena said firmly. "Tonight, I'll drive you," Benjamin offered without hesitation. "My wife's at her sister's place with the girls, and I've got nothing but time." Marlo pulled Caspian's jacket tighter around her shoulders, breathing in the scent that reminded her of a night when the world had made perfect sense. Now, everything was falling apart, and she wasn't sure she had the strength to hold the pieces together. Because sometimes the universe has a cruel sense of timing, and 3 months was exactly long enough for a secret to start demanding to be heard. Some truths change everything in the span of a heartbeat, literally. The urgent care clinic smelled like disinfectant and broken dreams. Marlo sat on the crinkly paper covering the examination table, Elena holding her hand while Benjamin paced near the window like a caged panther. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, casting everything in harsh, unforgiving clarity. "Mrs. Hayes?" Dr. Patricia Reeves entered with a clipboard and the kind of gentle smile that healthcare workers perfected after years of delivering life-changing news. She was maybe 50, with silver-streaked hair and kind eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses. "I have your test results." Marlo's grip on Elena's hand tightened involuntarily. She could feel her heart hammering against her ribs, each beat echoing in her ears like thunder. Benjamin stopped pacing, his attention focused entirely on the doctor's expression. "Well?" Elena's voice carried all the impatience of someone who spent her days waiting for critical test results. "Don't keep us in suspense, Doc." Dr. Reeves sat down on the rolling stool, bringing herself to eye level with Marlo. "You're pregnant. About 12 weeks along, based on the hormone levels and your last menstrual period." The words hung in the air like smoke from a fire that had already consumed everything. Marlo felt the world shift beneath her, as if the very foundation of reality had cracked and reformed itself in the space between one breath and the next. 12 weeks, she repeated numbly. The night with Caspian had been exactly 13 weeks ago. The math was simple, brutal, undeniable. That's almost 3 months, Benjamin said quietly, his business school mind automatically calculating timelines. His dark eyes met Marlo's with sudden understanding. "The timing, yeah." Elena's voice was soft with sympathy. "The timing is a real bitch." Dr. Reeves continued talking, something about prenatal vitamins and follow-up appointments and the importance of reducing stress, but Marlo's mind was elsewhere. She was back in Caspian's penthouse, moonlight streaming through floor-to-ceiling windows as he traced patterns on her bare shoulder and told her about his childhood fear of thunderstorms. "I need to call my grandmother," she whispered, the practical part of her brain finally kicking into gear. "She'll be worried. I always call her after work." "Marley." Elena's voice was gentle but firm. "You need to tell him." She didn't need to ask who him was. They all knew. Benjamin shifted uncomfortably, probably thinking about his own wife and daughters, about the moment he'd first learned he was going to be a father. "He thinks I'm cheating on him with someone else," Marlo said, the words tasting bitter in her mouth. "He won't believe me." "Then make him believe you." Elena stood up, her full height barely reaching Marlo's shoulder even while sitting, but her presence filled the room with fierce determination. "Girl, you've spent 3 months protecting everyone else's feelings, your grandmother's, by not telling her how scared you are, his, by disappearing instead of explaining why you left. When are you going to start fighting for yourself?" Through the clinic window, Marlo could see the parking lot where Benjamin's sensible sedan waited under a streetlight. Beyond that, the city stretched out in all directions. Millions of people living their own complicated stories, making their own impossible choices. "I can't afford a baby," she said quietly. "I can barely afford my grandmother's medications." "Money's just money," Benjamin said, surprising them both with the softness in his voice. Kids change everything. They make you braver than you thought possible, stronger than you knew you could be." "Doctor." Reeves finished her notes and handed Marlo a small white paper bag. "Prenatal vitamins. Start taking them immediately. And Mrs. Hayes, whatever you decide about telling the father, do it soon. Stress isn't good for you or the baby." As they walked toward the exit, Elena's arm around her shoulders and Benjamin's protective presence at her back, Marlo felt the weight of the secret she'd been carrying transform into something else entirely. Because sometimes the scariest conversations are the ones that have the power to save you, if you're brave enough to have them. Courage is nothing more than fear that has said its prayers. The elevator ride to the executive floor felt like ascending to her own execution. Marlo's reflection stared back at her from the polished steel doors. Pale, determined, clutching a manila folder that contained not just her quarterly report, but the ultrasound picture Dr. Reeves had given her as a congratulations gift she wasn't sure she wanted. It was 7:23 a.m., and she'd spent the entire night rehearsing what she would say. Elena had stayed up with her, making chamomile tea and practicing different approaches like they were preparing for a job interview, instead of potentially destroying 2 lives with a single conversation. "I just remember," Elena had said at 3 a.m., braiding Marlowe's hair with gentle fingers, "you're not asking for anything. You're giving him information. What he does with it is his choice." The elevator chimed softly, and the doors opened to reveal the executive floor in all its intimidating glory. Thick carpets, original artwork, and the kind of silence that only money could buy. Caspian's corner office dominated the east wing, floor-to-ceiling windows offering a view of the city that stretched to the horizon. His assistant, Mrs. Dorothy Kellerman, a woman in her 60s with steel-gray hair and the discretion of a Swiss banker, looked up from her computer with surprise. "Miss Hayes, Mr. Reed isn't expecting you until the 9 o'clock meeting." "I know, but I need to speak with him now. It's—" Marlowe's voice caught slightly. "It's personal." Mrs. Kellerman's eyebrows rose a fraction of an inch, the equivalent of shocked surprise from someone who had perfected the art of professional neutrality. "I'll let him know you're here." Through the partially open door, Marlowe could hear Caspian's voice on a conference call, discussing quarterly projections with what sounded like the London office. His tone was crisp, authoritative, every inch the CEO who commanded boardrooms and closed million-dollar deals before most people had their morning coffee. "Send her in," came his voice after Mrs. Kellerman's whispered announcement. Marlowe stepped into his office, and for a moment, the sheer scale of it took her breath away. The space was larger than her entire apartment, dominated by a massive mahogany desk that probably cost more than she made in 6 months. Behind it, Caspian sat in his leather chair like a king on his throne, morning sunlight streaming through the windows and highlighting the silver at his temples. He didn't look up immediately, finishing his call with the kind of casual authority that reminded her exactly how different their worlds were. When he finally raised his eyes to meet hers, she saw surprise flicker across his features before the familiar mask of cold professionalism slid back into place. "You're early," he said, his voice carefully neutral, "and you look like hell. I need to tell you something." She set the folder on his desk, her hands trembling slightly. "Something important. If this is about the Morrison account, it's not about work." The words came out sharper than she intended, and she watched his expression shift from mild annoyance to something more alert. "It's about us. About that night 3 months ago." Caspian leaned back in his chair, his brown eyes never leaving her face. "I thought we'd established that there is no us, Hayes. You made that clear when you disappeared without a word." "I was scared," she admitted, the truth spilling out before she could stop it. "I was scared because what happened between us felt too real, too big. I'm just some data analyst from the suburbs who shops at Target and clips coupons. You're—" she gestured helplessly at the opulent office around them. "You're this." Something flickered in his expression. Surprise, maybe, or recognition. "So you ran." "Yes, I ran. And I kept running because I thought it was better for both of us, but now—" She opened the folder with shaking fingers, pulling out the ultrasound image, the black and white blur that would change everything. "Now I can't run anymore." She placed the picture on his desk, watching as his eyes dropped to it, watching as understanding dawned across his features like sunrise breaking over a battlefield. And in the space of a heartbeat, Marlowe realized that some truths are too big to hide, even from yourself. Sometimes the silence before the storm is more terrifying than the thunder itself. Caspian stared at the ultrasound image for what felt like an eternity. His face had gone completely blank, the careful mask he wore in boardrooms and hostile takeovers slipping away to reveal something raw and unguarded underneath. Marlowe watched his chest rise and fall, watched his fingers grip the edge of his desk until his knuckles went white. "This is supposed to be mine." His voice was barely above a whisper, but it carried the weight of a man whose entire world had just shifted on its axis. "Yes." The word came out steady, despite the hurricane raging in her chest. 12 weeks along. The timing matches perfectly. He picked up the image with hands that weren't quite steady, studying the grainy black and white blur as if he could decode its secrets through sheer force of will. "How do I know you're not lying? How do I know this isn't some elaborate scheme to— To what?" Marlowe's voice cracked with hurt and exhaustion. "To trap the rich CEO? To get money? Caspian? I work 80-hour weeks just to keep my grandmother alive. If I wanted your money, don't you think I would have asked for it 3 months ago instead of disappearing? The use of his first name seemed to hit him like a physical blow. He set the ultrasound down carefully, as if it might shatter, and finally looked up at her with those brown eyes that had once made her believe in fairy tales. You're sure it's mine? The question was quiet, almost vulnerable, and for a moment she saw past the CEO to the man who had told her about his childhood fear of thunderstorms. There hasn't been anyone else. Her voice was soft but firm. There couldn't be anyone else. The office fell silent except for the distant hum of the city 23 floors below. Caspian stood slowly, moving to the window where morning sunlight painted everything in shades of gold and possibility. His reflection in the glass looked like a ghost, present but not quite real. I looked for you, he said suddenly, his back still turned. For 3 months, I had investigators, private detectives, people calling every Hayes in the city directory. I thought maybe something had happened to you. The admission hung between them like a bridge neither of them knew how to cross. Marlowe felt tears prick at her eyes, thinking of all the sleepless nights she'd spent wondering if he even remembered her name. I thought about calling, she whispered. Every day I thought about calling. But then I'd remember how different we are, how impossible it all seemed, and I'd lose my nerve. So instead you let me think you were dead. His voice was getting harder now, anger seeping in around the edges of vulnerability. Or worse, that I meant so little to you that you could just vanish. That's not, and now you show up here with this. He gestured at the ultrasound. Expecting what exactly? That I'll just accept it. That I'll take your word for it. The cruelty in his tone made her step backward as if she'd been slapped. This was the Caspian Reed the business world knew. Ruthless, suspicious, ready to attack at the first sign of weakness. I'm not expecting anything, she said quietly, her pride finally finding its voice. I'm telling you because you have a right to know. What you do with that information is entirely up to you. She turned toward the door, her heart breaking with each step. She'd known this was a possibility, that he would reject her, reject the baby, reject the very idea that she could be telling the truth. But knowing it and living it were two very different things. Marlowe. Her name stopped her with her hand on the door handle. She didn't turn around, couldn't bear to see whatever expression was on his face. I want a paternity test. The words hit her like arrows, each one finding its mark with devastating precision. She nodded once, not trusting her voice, and reached for the door. And Marlowe? His voice was softer now, confused and desperate. The person you were talking to on the phone, the one you told you loved. My grandmother, she said without turning around. And I was talking to my 83-year-old grandmother about her medical bills. And as she walked out of his office, Marlowe realized that some wounds cut so deep, even the truth might not be enough to heal them. When justice finds its voice, it can shake the foundations of even the tallest towers. Benjamin Carter had always prided himself on being a patient man. Basketball had taught him that sometimes the best play came from watching, waiting, and striking at exactly the right moment. But watching Marlowe walk out of Caspian's office with tears streaming down her face, and her shoulders shaking with silent sobs had tested every ounce of that patience. He knocked on Caspian's door with more force than strictly necessary. Come in. Caspian's voice sounded hollow, exhausted in a way that quarterly reports and hostile takeovers had never managed to achieve. Benjamin entered to find his CEO standing at the window, staring out at the city with the ultrasound image clutched in his right hand. The morning sun cast harsh shadows across his face, highlighting lines of stress that seemed to have appeared overnight. We need to talk, Benjamin said, closing the door behind him with deliberate emphasis. If this is about the Morrison account, it's about basic human decency. Benjamin's voice carried the quiet authority of a man who had grown up watching his mother work 3 jobs to keep food on the table. Ooh, and right now, you're failing that test spectacularly. Caspian turned slowly, his brown eyes flashing with the kind of dangerous anger that had cowed board members and competitors alike. Excuse me, you heard me? Benjamin moved closer, his 6-foot frame imposing despite being shorter than Caspian. I've worked for you for 5 years, Cass. I've seen you be ruthless, calculating, even cold when the situation demanded it, but I've never seen you be cruel to someone who didn't deserve it. You don't know what you're talking about, don't I? Benjamin pulled out his phone, scrolling to a series of emails and phone records. Because I know you hired 3 different private investigation firms to find her. I know you personally called every hospital in the tri-state area, asking about Jane Doe admissions. I know you haven't slept more than 4 hours a night since she disappeared. Caspian's face went pale, the carefully constructed wall of indifference crumbling. How do you— I'm the VP of this company. It's my job to know when the CEO is spiraling. Benjamin's voice softened slightly, though his stance remained firm. What I don't understand is why you're treating her like the enemy, when she just handed you everything you've been looking for. She left, Caspian said quietly, the words carrying the weight of 3 months' worth of sleepless nights. She left me standing in that hotel hallway like I was nothing. Maybe she had a reason. Like what? Like being ashamed of me? Like realizing I wasn't worth the trouble? Benjamin studied his friend's face, seeing past the expensive suit and CEO title to the scared kid who had grown up with parents who measured love in stock options and social standing. Or maybe she was scared. Maybe she looked at all this. He gestured around the opulent office and realized she was in love with someone whose world could crush hers without even noticing. The admission hung in the air between them, raw and honest. Caspian sank into his chair, suddenly looking older than his 31 years. She said she was talking to her grandmother. He whispered, not another man, her grandmother. Yeah, she was. Marlo Hayes works 16-hour days to pay for her grandmother's medical care. She shops with coupons, eats ramen noodles for dinner, and takes the bus to work because she can't afford car payments. The woman you accused of being a gold digger gives plasma twice a week to make ends meet. Each fact hit Caspian like a physical blow. Benjamin watched him process the information, watched the angry suspicion transform into something that looked dangerously close to self-loathing. How do you know all this? Because unlike you, I ask questions instead of making assumptions. Benjamin's voice was gentle but implacable. I talked to Elena, her roommate. I talked to Mrs. Henderson in HR. I even talked to the security guard who sees her waiting for the bus every night after everyone else has gone home. Caspian's hands were shaking as he picked up the ultrasound image again, staring at it as if seeing it for the first time. I demanded a paternity test. Of course you did. She's carrying my child, and God, Ben, what have I done? Benjamin sat down in the chair across from the desk, leaning forward with the intensity he'd once brought to fourth-quarter comebacks. The question isn't what you've done, Cass. The question is what you're going to do now. Because sometimes the hardest battles aren't fought in boardrooms or basketball courts. They're fought in the mirror, where a man has to face the worst version of himself and decide who he wants to be. Some apologies require more than words. They require the courage to change everything. 3 days passed before Caspian found the strength to leave his office. 3 days of staring at the ultrasound image, of replaying every cruel word he'd spoken, of Benjamin's voice echoing in his head. The question is what you're going to do now. He found Marlo in the last place he expected, the small neighborhood grocery store 6 blocks from the office building, wearing a red apron and restocking shelves with the same methodical precision she brought to her spreadsheets. It was 11 p.m. on a Friday night, and the fluorescent lights cast everything in harsh, unforgiving brightness. She looked exhausted, dark circles under those startling blue eyes, her black hair pulled back in a simple ponytail instead of her usual professional bun. She was crouched down, organizing cans of soup by brand and size, her movements careful and deliberate despite the obvious fatigue. Marlo. Her entire body went rigid at the sound of his voice. She didn't look up, continuing to arrange the Campbell's soup cans with trembling fingers. The store closes in 10 minutes, Mr. Reed. If you need something, you should probably— I need to apologize. That made her look up. Her eyes were wide with surprise, and he could see the exact moment when wariness replaced shock. She stood slowly, one hand unconsciously moving to rest on her still flat stomach. Apologize for what owned exactly? Her voice was carefully neutral, but he could hear the hurt underneath. For not believing me, for demanding a paternity test, for treating me like some kind of con artist. All of it. He stepped closer, noting how she instinctively stepped back until her shoulders hit the soup display behind her. For every cruel word, every assumption, every moment I let my own fear turn me into someone I don't recognize. The store manager, a heavy-set man in his 50s, appeared at the end of the aisle. Everything okay here, Marlo? It's fine, Mr. Torres, she said without taking her eyes off Caspian. This is my boss, from my day job. Mr. Torres looked between them with the shrewd eyes of someone who had spent decades reading people and situations. You sure? I'm sure. He nodded but didn't move far. busying himself with checking expiration dates on the dairy products while keeping one eye on their conversation. "I know about your grandmother," Caspian said quietly. "I know about the medical bills, the plasma donations, the 16-hour days. Benjamin told me everything." Her face flushed with embarrassment. "I don't need your pity. It's not pity. It's respect." He pulled something from his jacket pocket, a small velvet box that made her breath catch in her throat. "And it's terror, because I've never been more scared of anything in my life than I am of losing you again." "Caspian, don't." Her voice was barely a whisper. "Don't do this because you feel guilty. Don't do this because of the baby. I'm not." He opened the box, revealing a simple diamond solitaire that caught the fluorescent light and threw it back in brilliant fragments. "I bought this ring the week after you disappeared. I've been carrying it around for 3 months like some kind of talisman, hoping I'd find you and have the courage to tell you that I love you." Tears spilled down her cheeks, and she shook her head frantically. "You can't love me. You don't even know me. I know you take your coffee with 2 sugars and enough cream to turn it the color of caramel. I know you bite your lip when you're nervous, and that you have a scar on your knee from falling off your bike when you were 8. I know you cry during pharmaceutical commercials and that you keep your grandmother's picture on your desk even though you're terrified your coworkers will think you're unprofessional." Each detail hit her like a revelation. She stared at him as if seeing him for the first time, this man who had somehow memorized the small details of her life during one perfect night. "I know you're brave enough to work 2 jobs to take care of someone you love, and stubborn enough to disappear rather than ask for help." He stepped closer, close enough that she could smell his cologne, close enough to see the silver flecks in his brown eyes. "And I know that losing you was the worst thing that's ever happened to me. The paternity test? Cancelled. I called the lab this morning." His voice was soft, vulnerable in a way she'd never heard before. "I don't need a test to tell me what my heart already knows. That baby is mine, and more importantly, you're mine, if you'll have me." Mr. Torres cleared his throat loudly. "Store's closing, kids. Whatever you're gonna do, you better do it fast." Marlowe looked down at the ring, then back up at Caspian's face where hope and fear warred for dominance. The fluorescent lights hummed overhead, casting shadows that made everything feel surreal, like a dream she was afraid to wake up from. And in that moment, surrounded by soup cans and broken dreams, Marlowe realized that sometimes the most important decisions are made not in boardrooms or churches, but in the fluorescent-lit aisles of ordinary life. Love isn't about perfect timing. It's about having the courage to choose each other despite the chaos. The ring trembled in Caspian's hand as Marlowe stared at it, her blue eyes reflecting the fluorescent lights like captured stars. The entire store seemed to hold its breath. Even Mr. Torres had stopped pretending to check expiration dates and was watching openly now, a romantic at heart despite his gruff exterior. "You're shaking," she whispered, reaching out to touch his hand. The contact sent electricity through both of them, a reminder of the night that had started everything. "I'm terrified," he admitted, his voice raw with honesty. "I've closed billion-dollar deals without breaking a sweat, but asking you to marry me in a grocery store at 11 p.m., this is the most terrifying thing I've ever done." A laugh escaped her, watery and surprised. "You want to marry me? The girl who disappeared on you? Who's carrying your baby and works 2 jobs just to survive? I want to marry the woman who's strong enough to take care of everyone she loves, brave enough to tell me the truth even when she knew I might reject her, and stubborn enough to keep her pride even when the world is falling apart around her." He stepped closer, close enough that she had to tilt her head back to meet his eyes. "Wissam, I want to marry you because you make me want to be better than I am." Tears were streaming down her face now, and she made no attempt to wipe them away. "Caspian, I don't know how to be a CEO's wife. I don't know how to navigate your world, how to fit into country clubs and charity galas. I'm just—" "You're perfect." He cupped her face in his free hand, his thumb brushing away her tears. "You're perfect exactly as you are. I don't want you to change, Marlowe. I want to change. I want to be the kind of man who deserves you. And if I say yes, what happens to us? What happens when the novelty wears off and you remember that I'm nobody special? You're wrong." His voice was fierce, absolutely certain. "You're everything special. You're the woman who made me believe in love at first sight. You're going to be the mother of my children. You're my second chance at getting this right." Mr. Torres cleared his throat. "Listen, I hate to interrupt what's clearly a moment here, but I really do need to lock up. So whatever you're gonna say, sweetheart, say it now." Marlowe looked around the grocery store, at the fluorescent lights and linoleum floors. at the canned goods and frozen dinner displays. This wasn't how she'd imagined getting engaged. She'd always pictured something romantic, maybe on a beach at sunset or in a fancy restaurant with soft lighting and roses. But this was real. This was them, messy and complicated and absolutely imperfect. "Ask me," she whispered. Caspian's eyes widened with hope and disbelief. Slowly, carefully, he dropped to one knee right there between the soup aisle and the frozen foods, his expensive suit pressing against the scuffed linoleum floor. "Marlo Elizabeth Hayes," he said, his voice steady despite the emotion threatening to overwhelm him. "Will you marry me? Will you let me spend the rest of my life making up for the last 3 months? Will you let me be the father our baby deserves and the husband you've always needed?" She looked down at him, this powerful man humbling himself in a grocery store, offering her everything he had with hands that shook with vulnerability. Behind him, Mr. Torres was grinning like he'd just witnessed something magical. "Yes," she breathed, and then louder, with absolute certainty, "Yes, I'll marry you." The ring slid onto her finger with perfect simplicity, and then Caspian was standing, lifting her off her feet and spinning her around between the grocery aisles while Mr. Torres cheered and clapped like he was at a baseball game. When Caspian finally set her down, they were both laughing and crying at the same time, foreheads pressed together while the fluorescent lights hummed overhead like a benediction. "I love you," he whispered against her lips. "I love you so much it scares me." "I love you too," she whispered back. "I've loved you since that first night, and I never stopped, even when I was angry, even when I was hurt. I never stopped." Mr. Torres had disappeared to give them privacy, but they could hear him in the back office, probably calling his wife to tell her about the proposal he'd just witnessed. The store was officially closed now, but neither of them moved to leave. "So what happens now?" Marlo asked, her hand resting on her stomach where their baby was growing. "Now we figure it out together," Caspian said, pressing a kiss to her forehead. "All of it. The wedding, the baby, merging our worlds. We figure it out one day at a time." And as they stood there in the fluorescent-lit grocery store, holding each other like they'd never let go again, they both knew that some love stories don't start with fairy tale beginnings. They start with the courage to choose each other again and again, until choosing becomes as natural as breathing. 2 years later, some endings are really just beautiful beginnings in disguise. The morning sunlight streamed through the kitchen windows of their suburban home, casting golden patterns across the hardwood floors that little feet had learned to navigate with wobbly determination. Marlo stood at the counter, her black hair shorter now and styled in a practical bob that could survive baby food fights and toddler tantrums, preparing coffee in 2 familiar mugs, his black A, hers with cream and sugar. "Da-da, da-da." The excited squeal came from the living room, followed by the thundering sound of Caspian's dress shoes against hardwood as he chased their 15-month-old daughter around the coffee table. Isabella Rose Reed had inherited her mother's striking blue eyes and her father's stubborn determination, along with an impressive lung capacity that she used to great effect whenever she didn't get her way. She was currently wielding a stuffed elephant like a weapon, giggling as she evaded capture. "Bella, come to Mama," Marlo called, but their daughter was too busy escaping her father's tickling fingers to pay attention. The sight of them together, Caspian in his $1,000 suit crawling on the floor to retrieve a pacifier, his hair mussed and his tie askew, still made her heart skip beats. Elena emerged from the guest room, already dressed in her scrubs for an early shift at the new pediatric clinic she'd helped open in her old neighborhood. "Morning. Crazy people. How long has the chase been going on?" "About 20 minutes, Marlo replied, unable to keep the smile from her voice. "She discovered she can run faster than he can crawl." "Smart kid." Elena accepted a cup of coffee gratefully. "Takes after her mama." The front door opened and Benjamin's voice carried through the house. "Where's my goddaughter? Uncle Ben brought presents." "Ben!" Caspian called from the floor, where he'd finally cornered Isabella behind the couch. "You're supposed to ask before spoiling her." "Too late." Benjamin appeared in the doorway holding a shopping bag that made Isabella shriek with delight and abandon her elephant in favor of whatever treasure Uncle Ben had brought. The house filled with laughter and chaos, the beautiful, messy kind that Marlo had never imagined she could have. Benjamin's wife, Sarah, followed him in carrying their own 2 daughters, who immediately joined the circus in the living room. "How's Grandma Rose?" Benjamin asked, settling onto the couch while the children destroyed any hope of keeping the room tidy. "Thriving," Marlo replied, warmth flooding her voice. She moved into the senior community last month, and she's already organizing their book club and teaching watercolor painting. I think she likes having people her own age to boss around. Her grandmother's health had stabilized once the financial stress was removed. Once she could afford the best treatments and medications. The move to the assisted living facility had been her choice. She wanted, she'd said, to make friends and have adventures while she still could. Every Sunday they visited for dinner, and Isabella would spend hours listening to stories about her great-grandmother's youth while trying to eat crayons. Caspian finally emerged from the living room chaos, his expensive suit wrinkled but his eyes bright with happiness. He wrapped his arms around Marlo from behind, resting his chin on her shoulder as they watched their chosen family create beautiful mayhem in their living room. Any regrets? He murmured against her ear, a question he'd asked periodically over the past 2 years, as if he still couldn't quite believe she'd chosen this life, chosen him. Only one, she said, leaning back against his solid warmth. His arms tightened slightly. What's that? I regret that it took us 3 months and a grocery store proposal to figure out we belonged together. She turned in his arms, smiling up at him with eyes that held no shadows, no fear, only love that had grown stronger through every challenge they'd faced. I should have been braver sooner. We found our way, he said, pressing a kiss to her forehead. That's what matters. Isabella toddled over, her chubby hands reaching up to be lifted. Caspian scooped her up easily, and she immediately began her favorite game of trying to unknot his tie while babbling in the secret language only toddlers understood. Mama, Dada, up, she commanded, reaching for Marlo with one hand while maintaining her death grip on Caspian's tie with the other. They sandwiched her between them, this little person who had changed everything, who had taught them that love multiplies rather than divides, that their hearts were capable of expanding to hold more joy than they'd ever imagined possible. Group hug! Elena called from across the room, and suddenly they were surrounded by their chosen family, Benjamin and Sarah and their girls. Elena with her warm laugh and fierce loyalty, all of them tangled together in the kind of embrace that speaks of bonds deeper than blood. Later, after everyone had gone home and Isabella was napping, Marlo and Caspian sat on their back porch swing, watching clouds drift across an impossibly blue sky. His hand rested on her still flat belly, where their second child was growing, a surprise that had sent them both into delighted panic just last week. 2 under 2, she mused, still trying to wrap her mind around it. We're either very brave or completely insane. Probably both, he agreed, his thumb tracing gentle circles over her stomach. But we've gotten pretty good at figuring things out as we go. She thought about the woman she'd been 2 years ago, scared, alone, convinced she wasn't worthy of the kind of love that lasted. That woman could never have imagined this life, this abundance of joy and chaos and everyday magic. I used to think love had to be perfect to be real, she said quietly. I thought if it was hard work, if it required compromise and forgiveness and daily choices, then it wasn't the fairy tale. And now I know that real love isn't about perfection. It's about showing up, even when it's messy. It's about choosing each other every single day, especially on the days when it's difficult. She turned to look at him, this man who had learned to change diapers and sing lullabies, who had traded some of his work hours for family time and never once complained about the sacrifice. It's about building something beautiful together, one imperfect day at a time. Caspian lifted their joined hands to his lips, pressing a soft kiss to her wedding ring, the simple band they'd chosen together, engraved with the date of their grocery store engagement. I love our imperfect life, he said. I love our beautiful mess. As the afternoon sun painted everything in shades of gold and possibility, Marlo closed her eyes and listened to the sounds of their life, the baby monitor crackling softly, the neighbor's dog barking, the distant hum of traffic, Caspian's steady heartbeat beneath her cheek. And in that perfect, imperfect moment, she knew with absolute certainty that some love stories don't end with happily ever after. They continue with happily ever during, finding joy not in the destination but in the journey itself, one ordinary, extraordinary day at a time. Thank you for joining us on this emotional journey. Your engagement means everything to us. What did this story teach you about love, forgiveness, and second chances? Have you ever had the courage to choose love despite fear? Your participation in the channel is very important. Please leave your opinion in the comments. Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed the story, Please subscribe to our channel and leave a comment below letting us know what you thought. Your feedback and support mean a lot to us. Stay tuned for more exciting stories.